Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this evening's program. And a big thank you to the Commonwealth Club for bringing us together on this important topic. My name is Anu Madgavkar. I'm a partner at the McKinsey Global Institute, which is the economics and business research arm of McKinsey & Company. And I'm also the co-author of our new report, Agents, Robots, and Us, Skill Partnerships in the Age of AI, which we'd love to unpack and explore more about this evening. And you can download the report for free using the QR code that you see on the screen. Now, tonight I'll be talking with my McKinsey colleague, Alexis Krivkovich, who's a co-author of the report, as well as Katie George of Microsoft, and Kevin Delaney of the San Francisco Standard and Charter, about some of the major themes of the report. But first, sharing a sort of brief overview of what the research found and what we put forward. So what exactly is the research about? AI is a topic that sparks reactions ranging from extreme excitement to extreme anxiety in most audiences. Excitement for the possibilities, anxiety about the impact on human jobs and work. And both those perspectives are valid. But in the research, we really set out to go beyond the conventional headlines around AI is coming to take our jobs and really explore a more perhaps interesting and definitely useful and tractable question, which is how does work really change in the context of AI? And what does that mean for human skills that organizations need and are seeking to build? So rather than pitting humans against machines, the main finding and message of the report is that this next frontier of productivity that AI promises will involve not replacement alone, but will involve partnership. So work of the future will be increasingly a series of collaborations between human workers, AI agents, and AI-powered robots, each bringing to the table the skills and the strengths that are unique and that they do best, but interacting together to deliver and create more. Now, make no mistake, the impact of all of this is huge and sort of profound, and the transitions and the extent of change will be painful. And that's really because the scope is vast. So even based on today's proven technologies, we don't need even further technology breakthroughs, although they keep happening. But even based on what we know today, we can say that more than half of all work hours that are performed in the US economy today could theoretically be automated. So that's 57%. It's split roughly into about 44% that could be automated through AI-powered agents, and another 13% or so where robots could actually automate that work. But it's a large amount of potential automation, and it's widespread. It exists across industries and sectors. There's no occupation in the economy or no role that will be unaffected by AI. But equally, there'll be very few, if at all, any roles that will be completely eliminated by AI. So the big message is that roles and work will change, and that change could be order of magnitude, anything from 30 to 50% of what we do currently. Now, applying the prism of skills to this question of changing work, when we mapped all of the skills that employers currently demand in the workplace to the activities that could potentially get automated or not, we found that the vast majority of skills, some 70% of all skills, fall in both buckets. Things that we use in work that we think only humans will do, but also we apply the same skills in activities that we believe AI could do. And so this notion of shared skills is actually quite important. It means that human workers will need to upgrade, almost super skill their expression of things like problem solving, communication, creativity, empathy, judgment. All of these things, many of these things will be offered by AI, and human workers will need to work with AI to kind of upgrade their expression of what that skill means, and then collectively create something that goes beyond what AI can do. And the other implication of skills is that with the notion of all this change in the way we work, a lot of careers will be very fluid, career pathways will be unknown, people will have to keep changing what they do. And so the notion of transferable skills, things that we can use in different contexts, will become more and more important. But already we see that in the labor market, AI fluency is rising to the top of the list as the fastest growing family of skills. We looked at this over a 2-year period. Demand for AI fluency has risen 7-fold, and it's getting wider and deeper in the labor market. So well beyond just technical roles, but into business, finance, management, sales, operations, all kinds of other roles now see job postings where AI fluency is a required skill. And as this pans out, it's going to be worth a lot. There is a lot of economic value at stake. We think about this in terms of the value of human capacity that gets released or freed up or available for us to reuse and repurpose in doing things that are more value added. And the value of all of that is almost $3 trillion. And it could be realized in the space of 5 years based on adoption rates that we might expect. But it will require a lot of redesigning of workflows. This is not just a surgical removal of tasks through the automation process, but reimagining and reinventing how work gets done with AI embedded into those workflows. The final thing I will say is that the productivity potential is high, but there are a set of real leadership choices that will dictate or determine how much of that productivity we achieve and what the business and human outcomes really will be. A range of choices that would go from things like, perhaps, do I treat this as a wholesale organizational transformation using AI versus thinking about it as a much more contained and narrow and specific IT upgradation? Like, that's one set of choices. There are choices around the pace of how fast you move as an organization. What are those things where we should move fast, but what are those things that might benefit from needing to go a little more slowly because you need to build trust or ensure safety, for example? And crucially, what are indeed the kinds of work where humans will remain essential? What are the things that we think machines can do more or less autonomously? And what are the things that will benefit from partnership and collaboration between the two? So to unpack more of these questions and many more questions, I'm sure, I'd like to welcome onto stage our moderator, Kevin Delaney, along with my fellow panelists, Alexis and Katie.
Good evening. As Anu mentioned, I'm Kevin Delaney. I'm the editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Standard and Charter, a future work media and research company. And as she mentioned also, please join me in welcoming Alexis Krybkovich, senior partner at McKinsey and global co-head and North American leader of McKinsey's People and Organizational Performance Practice. She's also co-author of this report, Alexis.
Thank you.
And we are also joined by Katie George, who's a corporate vice president of workforce transformation at Microsoft. And of course, you've already met Anu Madgavkar, partner at the McKinsey Global Institute. So before we dive into the discussion, if you have any questions for our speakers, there are cards that are on your seats. And if you are joining us online, you can fill out questions through the YouTube chat, and then you pass the cards over, and then we'll leave time at the end for any questions that you might have. So we're going to dive in. Anu, I'm going to start with you. There are a number of things that you said that I think really we could unpack a little bit. And the first one is you're talking about how 57%, I think, of work hours in the US today could be automated. And what you said is that the way that this could play out is that roles or work could change. Can you give an example of how a role or a job might change as a result of what you're forecasting with AI and agents and robots?
Sure, we're actually seeing a lot of real life examples, right? And we looked at some of that in the context of the research. But take, for instance, a very standard setup of customer service. We have customer service agents who typically, take in calls and service questions or do things that customers need. And the big issue with a lot of these outfits is that you don't have very good customer satisfaction. And you also have waiting time, it's not so efficient and so on. So the way such a process is being reimagined and redefined using AI is to really break it up into things that agents that are designed to do specific parts of this task can do pretty much autonomously, and that includes things like figuring out on an incoming basis what the intent of the call is, deciding whether it's something that the agent can handle pretty much autonomously. There are many sorts of calls which are relatively easy to do. If it's more like a self-service type of call, then the agent decides that and then routes it to the back end, again, in a seamless way. And if it's more complicated or might require human interface, the agent not only figures that out, but also then prepares the inputs or the content or the context, will prepare the whole case and then pass it on to a human agent who will then have a much better conversation, fewer of those conversations, maybe talk to only 20% of the cases because those are the cases that need actual talking, but do so on a more informed basis and get much better customer satisfaction as well as a more efficient, streamlined process. So this is the notion of both reimagining the end-to-end piece with very autonomous agents working pretty much on their own, but also the interface, the interaction, the collaboration that says, here's an agent who's made more effective because here's a human who's made more effective because the agent is around to do so many parts of that. And
you're imagining that the human is still there, and they're not just like laid off or their job is limited, but rather they just do different kinds of work? Is that?
There might be different numbers of humans and certainly doing different kinds of work. So I think both the number of people as well as what they do will change.
So there could be fewer people and serving sort of higher touch customer service. Katie, maybe we'll come to you. I know at Microsoft, you have this job, this super interesting job, where you're looking at how the workforce is changing, how work is changing, both in Microsoft internally and at some of the frontier companies that you work with. And I think you've just done 75 case studies within Microsoft of how AI is playing out. Can you talk about what you're seeing inside your own company?
Yeah, so as you said, my team is learning across all of Microsoft and looking at what are we actually doing to change our own work processes. And what I found really interesting is it is true that AI can automate a lot of tasks that humans used to do. And you can see that is a large portion of some ways that some jobs and smaller portion of other jobs. But what's far more interesting, and honestly what I didn't expect, is that the greatest value that AI is creating is actually adding new capability into a work process. And so that's not about eliminating people's tasks and creating capacity or just dropping labor cost savings to the bottom line. It's adding new capability or new quality in. So for example, our audit function has really leaned forward into AI in a really exciting way. And while they would say that they can do an audit now with, more productively, what's far more valuable is that AI allows them to do proactive risk identification as part of the audit. So that wasn't actually defined as the task, that you would have been analyzing before. It's a whole new set of things that AI is bringing in that is creating far more value than whatever the cost savings are. And it is very much a partnership between humans who really understand what value is and how to direct AI and how to quality control it, and the AI agents and other tools. So think about the sales force preparing for a sales call. It's not just that AI is making the sales rep more efficient by doing some of the busy work that they otherwise would have to do. It's actually that AI is bringing all of this new analysis and perspective and recommendations and practice sessions in so that the quality of the sales call preparation is at a totally different level. And so there are tons of those examples, far more examples inside Microsoft where AI is augmenting the humans than where AI is primarily just automating things away.
One of the things we know is that a lot of companies are investing in AI now, maybe not as much as Microsoft, but a number of companies are actually feeling like it's hard to see the value from that. And I'm interested, you just mentioned the sales example. That might be a good example of how you actually go from your investment to seeing a new business benefit or customer benefit or that kind of thing.
I think there are two reasons why some companies are struggling with, really seeing the ROI. One is that the ROI we all thought was going to show up as labor cost savings in this very straightforward way, and it's not showing up that way. It's showing up as quality and speed and better customer experience, better employee experience, and that it's actually far more strategic value for most companies. It certainly is for us, but it's actually not something that's easy to measure and connect. And so one of the things we're doing is trying to standardize the way we look at AI impact across all of those different metrics, because often those metrics are more important than others. One good example of this in our Salesforce is that we look at revenue per sales rep. And we know that the reps with the highest use of the AI tools have the highest revenue per rep. So we're seeing that connection between growth and AI usage. And again, that's so what we're asking is for every one of our leaders to be really clear about what they're trying to achieve, what's important to their business, what's important to their part of the business, and therefore what are the metrics that they're going to look at, and how do they gear their AI approaches to achieve that. And that's actually the second thing that I think we're finding is part of the answer to more consistently create clear business impact from AI. We've actually developed a playbook, as you know, with 3 different recipes for how do you connect AI solutions into workflows in a way that drives business performance. Because if you just ask everybody to adopt Copilot and do their own prompt engineering or design their own agents with Copilot Studio, you don't necessarily get a lot of things that accrue to clear business performance improvement. So there's a real need for leaders to be clear about what they're trying to drive, and then to really engage their whole team in redesigning workflows end to end in a way that delivers that performance.
What you're saying about AI usage being correlated with greater revenue performance per salespeople reminds me of a conversation we had in our newsroom recently where we were talking about using AI in some way, and an editor said to me, I've seen people who work with AI and people who really don't want to work with AI. And my observation is that people who work with AI wind up with much better jobs than the people who actually refuse to work with AI.
And it shows up in our Thrive scores, which are our employee engagement scores. Again, our employees who are using AI the most are also the happiest. And if you look at kind of what are the tasks that they do during the day, one of the things we're starting to see, and we'll try to, quantify more rigorously, is that they have more varied kind of jobs and they're doing more interesting things.
Alexis, so Katie's just described the situation at Microsoft and across McKinsey and your clients. Where are you finding organizations are at in terms of what you've laid out in your report, like where things are heading?
Yeah. I mean, well, it won't surprise you that Microsoft is on the front end of the innovation and the change curve. I'd say, I see companies everywhere on the spectrum, from leaning all the way in and some of the very public examples that include some pretty public stumbles in some cases, but very innovative, experimenting, thinking about rebuilding the entirety of the workforce, the ways of working, the delivery around an AI-based future. And then I was with a CHRO last week who said, well, the first thing I need to do is convince the executive team on the business case to begin incorporating generative AI tools. And I thought, oh no, wow. we're not even in the middle of the pack here. We're behind. And I think what's paralyzing for a lot of executives is there is so much ambiguity, but this is moving so quickly that there's a natural instinct to say, let me take a bit of a conservative and wait approach till there's more clarity so that I don't expend a lot of energy, distract the organization, and blow a lot of resources on something that may not work. But the challenge underneath that is that really this is a change management game, and it's a long game. I mean, we talk about that in the report, and you need to be starting now doing all of the types of things that Katie's describing are just the way they think about deploying inside Microsoft, which is you need to be thinking about building the muscle of experimentation, of fluency, of judgment around what works, what doesn't work, how to keep moving the organization forward and becoming the type of company that has inside it the type of employees who are more AI forward-leaning than back.
I couldn't agree more. And I think in addition to the long game on change management from a people perspective, there's a long game on change management from a data readiness, data access, kind of systems readiness perspective for big legacy companies. And there's a long game on actually really understanding your work processes. One of the things that is, it's hard to tell AI to complete something if you can't actually articulate what that work process is. And a lot of knowledge work is tacit, and it's in people's heads, and each of us see a little piece of it, and we don't actually know what productivity or quality looks like. And so there's actually a lot of work that needs to be done to make processes more explicit so that we can actually reinvent them with AI.
I think one of the more exciting applications of AI for me in some ways is its ability to make tacit knowledge explicit. So you and I might be working, we might be working on a project, and there's lots of tacit knowledge that we couldn't actually easily share with each other, whereas AI is able to maybe help us actually do some of that. Katie just mentioned, or Alexis just mentioned fluency. Actually, Alexis mentioned AI fluency is one of the things that organizations need. And Anu, I wanted to ask you about that. In the report, you talk about AI fluency being something that's in high demand. What does it mean to be fluent in AI today and in the future? Like, what does that entail?
I think it's a range of skills that we use to collaborate with AI. So this is about using and sort of managing your work with AI. So things like, prompting, right? Prompting is basically to have some notion of the question that you want answered, to be able to frame that question in a way that AI gives you a reply. Usually it's not the perfect way that you framed it, and you figure that out when you see what AI is telling you. So the ability to iterate and improve and refine and sharpen your prompt to get what you want. The sense of validation to kind of do the sense checks on the kinds of outputs that you get back from the AI tool, and your ability really to refine that. So I think all of these are now increasingly showing up as kind of skill tokens or words that people want, right? When they describe a financial analyst, or when they describe an operations manager, or when they describe a sales manager, they're asking for the ability to work with some kind of AI to do these kinds of things.
Yeah. It seems to me part of it is just a willingness, or like to experiment and to have used it. Things that you described, like being able to prompt and do things like that, are things that it's almost a question whether someone has been willing or interested or to try, right?
I think it's mindset, but there is a real skill set. If you think about the skill of being able to articulate clearly an end state, to break work down into its subcomponents, to actually think about what good looks like for each subcomponent, and to delegate, to then actually do quality control, to communicate, prioritize, reprioritize. That's actually a set of management skills that most of us develop pretty late in our career, right, as we manage people. And some people are better than that than others, even who have management roles. And now we're asking everybody in the workforce to be able to do that. We did a workshop with my playbook. We do these workshops with teams to try to help them think through with different framings where the AI solution space would be that would really help them get to the next level. And with one team, the very first question I asked was, okay, pick one area where if you could really accelerate your performance, it would really matter to your customers. It would really drive your business results. And that was really meant to be just the throwaway to get started so that we could use that as an example for the rest of the workshop. Most of the workshop was helping them think through what that really was, and that's going to be the starting point. So I do think there's a set of, it's not just mindset to experiment, it's also having perspective, judgment. This is why I think we're seeing that, just as Anu described, the best AI transformation success stories are always a collaboration between humans who have really great judgment and perspective and an understanding of what value is with AI rather than not.
So as I'm listening to you, I'm hearing almost two sets of things. So there's the management skills, and Alexis, I'd be curious to your reaction to the management skills, which is, as you said, to be able to plan and delegate to AI in some ways and evaluate the work and so forth. There's also expertise, and I think, one of the questions that the initial research about the impact of AI, and a few of the initial studies were on call centers, was that it helped the least skilled workers make the most gains, and actually the expert workers actually didn't see as significant great gains. But my read of the latest research is actually the picture is more nuanced, and there is a place for expertise. I'd be interested, Alexis, in your reaction to these two things, like the management skills and the actual expertise in a
I
domain.
do think there are different types of skills, and we have a tendency to sort of smush together reskilling, upskilling, AI fluency, which in the report actually breaks that down into technical and non-technical. And the biggest growth is, as Anu was describing, in the non-technical, like the average person changing their job to incorporate AI inside, not the super coder or the person who's going to create the agent or data environment that allows it to thrive. And so there's a lot of different kind of lenses to it. On the expertise point, what I think AI now does incredibly well, especially as the models advance, is really point expertise and very specific domains that in the past you had sort of a scarcity issue in a lot of organizations around. Like, we got one person who knows how to do X in this environment. And now what you're seeing is, in part because a lot of those places are places where you can really define or gather over time sort of the underlying knowledge base, where the expertise is really a premium with the human, is that judgment and how do I take sort of a situation and think about, just as Katie was describing, how you break it down into its pieces, where the biggest value is going to be, bring back an insight and look at it and say, is that going to be material in changing a client or customer experience or not? And those are very human things. And so when you look at the skill curves that this research decomposes across every type of role, what you see is there's some skills that we used to value immensely that are very point expertise driven or built over years of time. I know how to use certain type of coding. I have, experience doing a lot of data mapping or working with the sales plan, things like that, that AI is basically automating away. And then there are other skills that are incredibly human at the heart: negotiation skills, pattern recognition skills, prompt and judgment skills that AI is really not very effective at, or not really meant to point itself at. And so I think what's going to be fascinating to watch is, even if a much smaller number of jobs go away, which is certainly my hope, what you will see is just about everybody's job description is being rewritten in real time.
Yeah. One thing, just to stay on this point for a second, Alexis, one thing that I've heard is that organizations are finding there's this idea of AI work slop. So basically you have people who just sort of get the AI to spit something out. They don't think really critically about it, and then they hand it over to their colleagues. This could be a presentation or an email or something, and it's for their colleagues to actually process, sort through it. And one thing that I've been hearing is that the value of expertise is that it allows you to better refine the output of AI, and that this idea that less skilled workers are upskilled reaches its limit because they're not able to distinguish between what's slop and what is actually quality product as easily as an expert.
Right.
Is that a fair
Yeah, I mean, I was, it was funny, I was having this conversation the other day with a CHRO who said, well, I'm trying to use AI to improve my talent attraction process and my job descriptions and the outreach to a broad set of folks. But then everyone else is using AI to create a job resume that meets my job and I now feel like my AI and their AI are like battling it out and I'm definitely not getting a better answer as a result. But internally you have sort of the same phenomenon, right? Like I'll have AI answer my questions and do my work and then I'll pass it to you and eventually the buck stops with someone and a leader is left trying to make sense of it. I do think there's increasing discipline, and some of that is the hangover of, early days of experimentation, models, and things that are not quite as strong. But I also think it's putting a lot of pressure inside organizations to say, how are we going to continue to build that type of judgment and skill? Because if that sits right now in senior leaders because they have 20, 30 years of the rear view mirror to work off of, but the next generation is like, oh, it's all going to fly out of AI and I won't need to know that. I mean, that's where you get this tension where you say, no, you still need a ton of human judgment. We just have to rethink where the human's in the loop and how the human shows up. And I think in a lot of organizations, we'll have to rethink how do you build a healthy pyramid of employees, pipeline all the way up who can learn those skills, but learn them in a different context.
Yeah, let's come back to the early career workers in a minute. Anu, we've talked about AI fluency, some of these management skills, some of the expertise. The report actually is quite detailed about the skills that will remain relevant and will remain less relevant over time. Can you talk through examples in both of those categories?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there is a real theme of, if you think about this skill change or skill impact curves, right, that we draw out for different occupations and sectors, there's this real theme about skills that occur on the right-hand side of that, which are more likely to kind of get automated away, are the skills which are more kind of codified data and information-driven, where it's really about processing something that is frankly quite routine, right, and pattern-based. So for example, in manufacturing, something like scheduling production, right, like or even estimating how much you should produce of something, right? If you think about healthcare or hospitals, it's stuff like checking, coverage specifications and details. That's actually quite it's just mired in information and data, and the patterns are very easily visible, and it's something that you could easily see being automated away. But on the left-hand side, you get many more skills where they're fundamentally more ambiguous, and they typically tend to be things that involve more social and emotional layers of judgment, ambiguity and judgment. So there you see things like, frankly, even coaching. A coach might use AI as a tool, but the quality of the coaching and the conversation might just be something that we still believe humans should do, right? So things like that, relationship and trust building, selling techniques, stuff like, motivation and management, of performance management dialogues, not just the cranking of the numbers to know what to say, but to actually creatively ideate how performance can be improved. So those kinds of skills are those that we think they will change too, but they won't be automated away. They will be things that we hope will be enhanced or become super skills based on a lot of things that AI can do for us.
And in the report, there are a bunch of skills, including communication, management, operations, problem-solving, leadership, that you sort of draw a straight line as being continuing to be relevant.
These kinds of skills continue to be relevant. I would also say they are what we call in the research, I think they are transferable skills. They are so foundational. They occur in most roles and occupations, and they are somewhere in the middle zone of our skill change. So we see a lot of potential there in things like problem solving and communication, which I think we've all experienced using AI, that you can get better at it if you use AI, but it's not necessarily something that you would completely, delegate away and have no role to play in.
Yeah. I think a question, just to zoom out for a second, then I want to hit some other topics like early career workers and others. But I think a question that a lot of people have is like, for young workers, and I ask this partly because you're looking at the skills that transfer. What should I study? What kind of job should I steer myself at for, it's a sort of parallel question for middle and later career workers. What should I try and upskill myself for? What should I try? Is there, I'm going to recommend that everyone reads your report, and then the answer will be totally clear to them individually. But how would you, Alexis, maybe do you have a...
I have 3 teenagers, so I'm asking myself this question every single day. And I'm chuckling because Anu and I talk quite a bit about the single biggest question we could ask. We go, I read your report, it's so interesting. What I'd love to talk about is, what major should my child study? I'm like, maybe that should be the next report.
What's the answer?
What would I say to that? I think what I would say in this moment is the best thing every student can do right now is think about whatever they're studying, how to incorporate AI into their experience. Because I think the biggest challenge, frankly, is for some of the early workers who were one step ahead of this AI revolution and coming out into the workforce, but not yet far enough in to have a lot of that expertise we were talking about that helps create sort of a bit of the judgment layer and managerial layer that assists you, and you're kind of in a bit of a catch-up moment. But for those who are sort of on the front end of the journey, I think it's thinking about how to do everything with it. And my biggest worry in education is that we'll create too much of like a walled garden and say, don't use AI for anything except checking for plagiarism. Don't use AI as a study guide. Don't use it in the in the environment of learning. In fact, we're going back to blue books in the room, right? Because we're trying to manage the risks associated with it. But it's like suggesting you're not going to use a computer when 5 years from now, every job that has a desk is going to have a computer attached to it. And so I think that's the biggest piece that I focus on.
My understanding is that, the famous McKinsey case interview, you're now asking people to do the case interviews with AI, which means they have to come to the table knowing how to use modern tools in order to address the kind of questions
I think that's going to be
testing. And
much
I think
more
that's
common.
going to be much, much more common. Some of the people we're hiring, we want them to do a full stack product build with AI. That's the interview, as opposed to, demonstrating foundational, skills, et cetera. And it isn't that we don't need foundational skills, we do. But I do think, I very much agree with what you said, which is we need people prepared to be the reinventors of how things happen with AI. And so we need people who are really comfortable experimenting with it and leaning in.
Okay.
I think I completely agree with what Katie just said, and I think there's an attribute or a dimension to being an experimenter and a creator who tries new things that is also worth encouraging and learning outside of in the context of AI. So if there is an attribute, I don't know if you can call it a skill or a college major or something like that, but if there is an attribute that the education system should really focus on building now, it is that. It is this mindset of tinkering and let me try something and let me create something and kind of figure out how to do something better. It's that kind of approach to problem solving that you really want. And then, of course, you want kids to do that with AI and to come to the workforce more ready to be able to apply those AI tools. But at the heart of it, this is not an era in which we will be valued for knowing something and then putting our heads down and kind of doing just that thing. Yeah. This is something that's going to ask us to keep questioning and trying to create and do something different and better.
Mm-hmm. I don't feel like I have the answers to this, but I have heard some interesting answers to the sort of careers that are more protected. And like one thing we're seeing probably is around sort of people care and healthcare and things like that. In the latest job reports, it's very clear that healthcare jobs are the almost the sole engine of job creation. While tech, for example, is showing much reduced demand or creation of jobs. Kevin Roos of the New York Times once, I've read in his book, he talks about how if you do a job that people will pay to watch, you perform your job like a musical performer or a professional sports person or even a celebrity chef, that job is maybe safe because there's that...
A little niche if we all became NFL players.
If you start young with your teenagers, maybe you have hope here. Another way of thinking about it is think about areas where there's more demand if the product actually gets cheaper. So among the things that AI does is it potentially reduces the cost of things. So if you work in a area, like one example I think of is like medical scans. Like medical scans are very expensive, but if we could get $5 medical scans, like we'd probably get a lot more medical scans than
But
we
I
do
think that
currently.
applies far more broadly
Yeah.
than we think. So a lot of the places that we're seeing inside Microsoft, these case examples, a lot of the value of AI is speed. And it turns out that when you do something well, faster, or with a different quality levels I described before, the demand for it goes up. So for example, one of the groups that has really reinvented the way they work is this group that does complex prototyping engineering projects with our big customers. And so they bring together data scientists, designers, software engineers, and they've figured out how to really change the way they work together and independently in their areas with AI. And now the kind of prototype that might have taken 12 weeks before takes a week.
Yeah.
And so that's a totally different value proposition to our customers. So the demand for this capability is way up. And I think we see that over and over. Again, I was actually talking to somebody from one of the big four firms, and he was talking about how this group in India does a certain kind of analysis for their clients, and it used to take about a month to do, and it was, whatever. Now it takes just a couple hours. And so somebody said, oh, so have you been able to reduce the size of the India team dramatically to take advantage of this great cost savings? He said, no. Now our clients ask for it daily instead of monthly because it's valuable every day.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to see a lot of that kind of dynamic, not just in the in the medical scans and things that are obvious, but other places that are less obvious.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So encourage people to think about those areas where if things can be faster or cheaper, the demand actually goes up.
Yeah.
When I think about journalism, I'm afraid that if we produced more articles cheaper, the equations are not in our favor. There's an essay right now by tech CEO Matt Schumer that's sparking a lot of anxiety and reaction about the impact of AI on jobs. And among the other things, his sort of thesis is basically we see where coders are sort of on the front lines of the wave that's going to come through, the tsunami that's going to go through the jobs market, and that what he said is basically AI is doing coders' jobs, and his sort of thesis is that we all should do things like get our financial house in order and and things like that. His view is actually pretty alarming. You kind of start hyperventilating when you read it. And he said, I know the next 2 to 5 years are going to be disorienting in ways most people aren't prepared for. This is already happening in my world. It's coming to yours. Katie, do you want to react and maybe
Sure,
Alexis?
I'd love others' reactions too. Like his primary thesis is AI today is so much more powerful and more effective than AI even a couple months ago because of the most recent model releases. And we are definitely seeing this, and we're seeing it first in software. Yeah. And so people are, it's blowing people's minds. It's what can be done today, different. And so, I talk about the case studies that we've done. One of the questions I have is, with the new capability of AI, will some of the findings that I described change? And how fast will they change, and will they change? So we take that seriously. But I was talking to one of our engineering heads actually about this, not about the essay, but before that, about the new models. And he said, just to be clear, I want to create I have such a long backlog of things that I need to do for my customers. I want to get through that faster, and I want to create twice as many products and releases, but that are of a completely different level of quality, that are, where I'm using the speed and the capacity to do much more customer interaction and really understand what the customer needs are, as opposed to doing 10 times more at the same level of quality that I have today. And so again, I think we're going to see even the new capability that AI brings to the table applied in a way that is aligned to where the greatest value is, which may not be just taking human capacity out. It's probably going to be quality and speed as well. And then the other thing I question, and we'll see, is I think that in coding, which is only a part of the end-to-end product development process, right? I think we are seeing, the kind of productivity that Matt describes. It is hard to apply this to finance end-to-end processes and payroll and sales and HR, et cetera, because again, these are complicated processes, workflows that have lots of systems and data and different people doing different things without a lot of clarity as to what they are actually doing and what the end product is and how to redesign. And so I think there's going to be a stickiness around some of these other enterprise processes that maybe are not as true for coding.
There's like friction. The change doesn't happen as instantly as it might in coding, which given that it's all digital, et cetera. Yeah. I
think so. And we already have been seeing AI native companies redefine those processes in a completely new way, AI first, but that doesn't mean that you can just pick that up and apply it into other larger companies.
Alexis, how do you see this? Yeah.
I mean, I would agree fully that the example that he uses is quite compelling about, what would take coding and weeks, maybe months, that AI doesn't just build an initial instance. It tests itself, it refines itself, it has judgment. He talks about adding taste and like these very human attributions to create something even better than he thinks with extra manpower, more time, he would have even come up with. And it's a very compelling thought. But then I think about every enterprise I know, and they're not producing an app a minute. I mean, if you gave them the chance, that's not how they would create value in the organization.
Exactly.
And so I think to Katie's point, it's like it's a whole system. And if you start with where's the value creation actually happen, I think there's some places where that concept is really exciting, like drug development. The idea that you could take, we've often talked about financial inclusion and the idea that you could take the kind of expertise that's delivered to the wealthiest and apply that in a highly tailored way to the masses. Like there are these great examples where if you can get that right, you should unlock value, but it's not because you're going to take, huge swaths of the people away because the agents will run the universe. I do think one of the concepts he gets dead right is if you believe this is more revolution and a permanence, and I do, that's here now to stay in terms of technology deployment, how much time do you devote personally to getting up to speed? And I'm amazed when I ask that question in boardrooms, in executive rooms, with management layers, folks who are meant to drive the value, an hour a day. Most of them might be spending an hour a week.
Yeah.
You might think you should be spending 3 days a week on this right now, but the point being, like, if this is going to be that profound in whatever form it takes, the gap right now between how not just average employees, but even leaders are keeping up to speed with kind of what's going on, just so they have a sense of the potential, is widening by the moment.
Yeah.
I saw a recent survey of CEOs, global CEOs across all different industries, and they have categorized, which CEOs are most bullish on the value that they're getting, and which ones, you can see kind of the retraining investments that they're making and the technology investments. And one of the key differentiators between those that are really leading and starting to really change their companies is how many hours a week they were personally spending to learn AI themselves.
Yeah.
And in the Matt Schumer essay, he says, I know the people who come out of this best are the ones who start engaging now, not with fear, but with curiosity and a sense of urgency, which is exactly what you're all saying. Anu, you and I spoke a few years ago about, you did a really interesting research about how demographic factors meant that labor markets were tightening. Basically, there's less immigration in the U.S., for example. There's an aging population, and the U.S., like other companies, could actually struggle to find workers. AI was a factor at the time, but if you overlay what you know now about AI, do you have the same analysis that labor markets going forward in a country like the U.S. or in the U.S. will be tight because of a insufficient supply of labor.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting sort of confluence of these two trends, and it's almost, I think, serendipity, right? That we are in the midst of this AI revolution at the same time that we are in the midst of a massive demographic reset around the advanced economies, at least, if not the whole world, right?
Yeah.
I think back in 24, when we were seeing what felt like peak levels of labor shortage and labor market tightness in the US and Europe, a lot of that shortfall of labor or open vacancies which were being unmet in the job market were, interestingly, in work that was more physical in nature, right? So we come back to healthcare-related occupations, construction, accommodation and food, leisure and hospitality, some types of transportation. It wasn't really at that point that we were seeing shortages in all of this information-based, the information economy was not sort of tight at that point. It had attracted a lot of workers historically, like everyone's gone into knowledge work, everyone's into finance or consulting or tech or what have you, right? And then in manufacturing, you weren't really seeing it because, again, in manufacturing, because of the industrialized nature of manufacturing, automation rates were already trending
Very
up,
high,
and you
yeah.
weren't really growing by adding more bodies into manufacturing. So it was these physical work and physical skill, let's say, intensive types of occupations. And I think going forward,